Imagine the terror being trapped in a situation where every sound, every shadow, feels like a threat. For a group of innocent children, their lives were about to take a horrifying turn, and they had no idea what was coming. On what started as an ordinary day, these kids found themselves in the middle of an unimaginable nightmare, one that no one could have predicted. The calm of their small neighborhood shattered in an instant, as they were unknowingly pulled into a web of danger that no child should ever have to face. As the hours ticked by, fear spread like wildfire. The unknown loomed larger than ever, and the only thing standing between them and the worst possible outcome were the men and women in uniform who rushed toward the danger, ready to risk it all to save them. In this gripping story, we'll take you through the high-stakes moments of a police operation that defied the odds. The team of officers who responded had no idea what they were walking into, and the risks they faced were beyond anything they had ever encountered. But what motivated them was simple: the lives of these children were at stake. Every decision had to be made in the blink of an eye, every move had to be precise, and every second counted. With lives hanging in the balance, their training, courage, and instincts were put to the ultimate test. As the clock ticked down, one thing became clear: there was no room for mistakes. But as the rescue operation unfolds, questions linger. Who could be behind this terrifying situation, and what drove them to target innocent children in such a heartless way? What dark secrets were about to be revealed, secrets that could change everything? With every twist and turn, the story takes on new layers of complexity, and the stakes climb higher than anyone could have imagined. The children, the officers, and even the people pulling the strings, none of them will walk away unchanged. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the chilling moments that led up to this rescue, uncover the unimaginable truth behind the nightmare, and reveal how this terrifying event unfolded in the most unexpected ways. The answers are closer than you think, but you won't believe how it ends. The night before everything changed, things seemed normal. Sarah, a single mother of two, had been juggling her job at the local diner and the never-ending demands of raising her kids, 12-year-old Max and 10-year-old Lily. It wasn't easy, but she managed. She'd always prided herself on her ability to keep things together, to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a world that often felt chaotic. But that evening, there was something different in the air. Sarah hadn't been able to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. It wasn't much, just a nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. She brushed it off as stress, a side effect of her unpredictable life. What she didn't know was that her instincts were right, that darkness was already creeping into their world, and it was closing in faster than she could realize. Earlier that day, Max had mentioned a new friend he'd met at school, a quiet, older kid named Jake, who had moved to town recently. Sarah hadn't paid much attention to the details. At the time, she was used to Max making friends quickly, but something about Jake's description felt off. The kid seemed too mature for his age, too secretive. He never really stayed for long when Max invited him over after school, always making excuses about having to go somewhere or do something important. It struck Sarah as odd, but she didn't push it. She had enough on her plate. Besides, Max seemed happy, and that was all that mattered. But now, as she looked back, she couldn't help but wonder if that was where it all began. The next morning, things began to fall apart. Sarah had woken up to the sound of Max and Lily arguing in the kitchen. Max's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, as he stood by the door, his hand clutching Lily's arm tightly. She could tell something had happened, something he didn't want to say. After a few minutes of pressing him, Max reluctantly confessed. He told her about Jake, how Jake had insisted on showing him something cool after school the previous day. What Max hadn't known was that the cool thing Jake had in mind was far from innocent. It was a secret place, hidden on the outskirts of town, where people went when they didn't want to be found. Max hadn't seen much, but he'd heard enough to make his blood run cold. There were whispers about plans, things that shouldn't be happening so close to home. He was scared, and as Sarah listened to her son's trembling voice, a pit formed in her stomach. She had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear: her son was in way over his head. Things only got worse from there. The phone rang in the middle of the night, a strange, muffled voice on the other end. It was a man, someone Sarah didn't recognize, telling her in a low, menacing tone that if she wanted to keep her kids safe, she needed to stop asking questions. The connection was cut before she could say anything, leaving her heart pounding in her chest. Was this some kind of twisted prank, or was there something more to it? Her thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of the bizarre encounter. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but she couldn't quite fit them together. By the time the sun rose, Sarah knew that her children were in immediate danger. She called the police, but by then, the situation had already escalated far beyond what she could handle. The officers on the scene, led by Detective Daniels, a seasoned investigator with years of experience, were quick to assess the danger. But even they were taken aback by the sheer complexity of the situation. This wasn't just a case of kids sneaking around. There were people involved who had planned every step carefully, with precision and secrecy. People with dark intentions who weren't afraid to hurt anyone who got in their way. As Detective Daniels gathered his team, he started connecting dots that made things even more chilling. Jake's family had only moved into town a few weeks ago, but it seemed like they were already deeply involved in something sinister. And it didn't take long for the police to uncover Jake's connection to an underground network, a group that had been operating in the shadows for years, pulling strings across the town without anyone knowing. But this wasn't just about drugs or petty crime. This was something bigger, something more organized, and it involved children in a way that no one had expected. Sarah's fears were justified, but the truth was far more terrifying than she could have imagined. With every passing hour, the mystery deepened. Who was pulling the strings? What was their endgame? And why were innocent kids being dragged into this nightmare? Detective Daniels could feel the pressure mounting, knowing that with every minute that passed, the chance to stop it all grew smaller. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone, somewhere, was always one step ahead. As his team began to close in on the suspects, an unexpected twist sent everything spiraling further out of control. One of their own had gone missing, and it seemed as though the very people they trusted were working against them. The tension was unbearable, and with each new revelation, the question remained: would they get to the children in time? Or would they become the next victims in a twisted game they could never have predicted? As the investigation unfolded, the pressure mounted for Sarah and Detective Daniels. Despite the growing leads, something felt off. Every time they seemed to get closer to the truth, another obstacle popped up. The first blow came when the police attempted to trace the mysterious call Sarah had received the night before. The call had been routed through a burner phone, untraceable and nearly impossible to track. The voice on the other end had given her an ominous warning, but now the lingering fear that whoever was behind it had eyes everywhere was beginning to sink in. No one was safe, and the closer they got to the truth, the more it seemed that those in the shadows were actively working to stop them. Then came the disappearance of the key evidence they had worked so hard to gather: a small, inconspicuous notebook found in Jake's bedroom, filled with cryptic notes and references to a hidden group. A name that kept coming up repeatedly in the investigation: the Red Circle. The notebook had been collected by Detective Daniels personally, who was convinced it held the answers they needed. But when they returned to the station to review it, it was gone. No one knew where it had gone or how. The only thing left was an unsettling feeling that someone had intentionally removed it, and the suspicion grew that there was a mole inside the department. Sarah couldn't shake the sense that they were being watched, that every step they took brought them closer to an unseen danger that was always one move ahead. As the investigation seemed to stall, Sarah received another warning. this time from an unexpected source, her estranged brother, Ethan. He had reached out after years of silence, his voice trembling on the phone as he begged her to drop the case. Ethan had always been a bit of a wild card, never really fitting into the neat little box of life Sarah had tried to carve out for herself. But what shocked her most wasn't his sudden appearance, but the desperate tone in his voice. He seemed genuinely afraid, more so than she had ever heard him. Ethan warned her that if she kept digging, she might be digging her own grave. "There's more to this than you know, Sarah," he said, the words lingering in her mind long after the call ended. Was he trying to protect her, or was he trying to cover up something far darker? His cryptic words only fueled her determination to find out what was really going on, but they also made her question everything. Could he be involved? Could someone so close to her have played a part in all of this? Determined to press forward, Sarah continued to search for any remaining clues. And that's when things took an even darker turn. Late one night, she was going through old family photos, trying to piece together any connection between Jake's family and her own, when she came across something she hadn't expected: a photo of Ethan with a man she didn't recognize, standing in front of a building that seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place. The man was smiling, his arm draped casually around Ethan's shoulder, but there was something about his expression that made Sarah uneasy. As she stared at the photo, trying to remember where she had seen that building before, it hit her. She had seen it in the notes from Jake's notebook, the very same building referenced in the cryptic messages that had been hidden in plain sight. The realization struck like a bolt of lightning. Ethan's past was far more intertwined with this whole situation than she had ever imagined. With that thought swirling in her mind, Sarah decided to confront Ethan. The meeting was set for that evening, but just as she was about to leave, a message popped up on her phone. It was from an unknown number, the message simple yet chilling: "You're too close. Stop now, or you'll regret it." The text sent a wave of cold dread through her. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching, they were controlling the narrative, pulling the strings from the shadows, and they had no intention of letting her or anyone else expose the truth. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a photo. A picture of her children, taken just moments ago from the window of their house. Whoever was doing this knew everything. The tension in Sarah's chest grew unbearable as she looked out the window, wondering how much of her life had been secretly observed by forces far beyond her understanding. The sudden realization hit her like a punch in the stomach. No matter how hard she tried to protect her kids, she was always 2 steps behind. Just then, a car pulled up in front of her house, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she thought it was someone coming to finally end it all. But when she looked closer, her heart sank. It wasn't someone she expected to see, it was Ethan. But this time, he didn't look like the protective brother she once knew. There was a hardness to his gaze, something that made her question everything she thought she understood about him. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. But as he stepped closer, something about his presence felt wrong, as though he wasn't here to help, but to bury the truth even deeper. And in that moment, everything she thought she knew about this case, the motives, the people involved, and the web of deceit shattered in a single, horrifying instant. What was Ethan really hiding? And was he working with the very people who had put her children in danger? The answers were slipping through her fingers, and the only thing she knew for certain was that the nightmare was far from over. As Sarah stood frozen in her doorway, Ethan's eyes locked with hers, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. The way he stood, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his posture almost defensive, made her stomach churn with unease. This wasn't the brother. She remembered, the one who used to laugh at her endless list of rules, the one she'd once trusted with her life. No, this man felt like a stranger, someone who had something to hide, and it wasn't just about his mysterious past. The feeling of being trapped, of having nowhere to turn, settled over her like a weight she couldn't shake. Before she could say anything, the front door creaked open behind her, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was Max. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, and he held something tightly in his hand. Without a word, he thrust it into her palm. It was a torn, crumpled piece of paper, one that looked eerily similar to the note she'd seen in Jake's room, scribbled with a strange, cryptic message. The words were jumbled, but Sarah could make out a few things. The red circle is watching. Trust no one. They know everything. Max's voice broke the silence. Mom, I found it under my pillow. I don't know how it got there. I didn't, but Sarah cut him off, her mind racing. The last thing she needed was more confusion, more unanswered questions. She gripped the paper tightly, the familiar sense of dread creeping up her spine. This wasn't just about her anymore. Whoever was behind this had clearly made her family their target. But why? What had they done to deserve this? Ethan stepped forward, his voice lower now, almost pleading. Sarah, you need to listen to me. The more you dig, the worse it gets. You don't understand what's at play here. I didn't want to be part of this, but I didn't have a choice. His words were cryptic, and she could hear the desperation in his tone, but it only made her more suspicious. Was he confessing to something, or was he trying to manipulate her, trying to divert her attention from the truth? She didn't know who to trust anymore, and the longer Ethan stood there, the less certain she became of anything. The puzzle pieces were scattered, and she couldn't see how they fit together, but she knew there was something deeply wrong with everything he was saying. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house, cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. Sarah turned toward the door, her instincts on high alert. Was it the police? Had they finally found something concrete? But when she opened it, she wasn't prepared for the sight that greeted her. Standing on her doorstep was a stranger, an older man, maybe in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that carried the weight of too many secrets. He wore a black jacket that seemed out of place for the time of day, and he didn't seem to be in any hurry to speak. Instead, he stood there, his gaze locked on her, as though waiting for her to make the first move. Before she could ask what he wanted, the man stepped forward, his voice low and steady. You don't know me, but I've been watching you. Your family's in danger, and if you don't stop now, you'll lose everything. He handed her a manila envelope, thick with papers, and as she took it from him, he turned and walked away without another word. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. Ethan's urgency was palpable, his nervous energy only adding to the chaos swirling in her mind. Max had gone upstairs, his face drawn and pale, while Lily clung to her, unaware of the gravity of everything happening around them. But Sarah couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that they were being watched. Her instincts told her that the events of the past few days weren't just coincidences. No, this was something bigger, something far darker, and now they were too deep into it to walk away. It wasn't until she stepped outside to take a breath, hoping to clear her head, that she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of eyes on her. At first, she thought it was just the weight of everything finally getting to her, but as she glanced around the quiet street, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A black car, parked across the street, with tinted windows. It had been there for at least 20 minutes, but as soon as Sarah looked in its direction, the engine roared to life, and the car slowly pulled away. It wasn't a big thing, just a car, just a passing moment. But Sarah knew. She knew they were following her. Whoever they were, they had made it clear that they weren't going to let her uncover the truth. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rushed back into the house, locking the door behind her. She couldn't explain why she felt so certain, why her gut told her that the car wasn't just a coincidence, but the weight of the moment was undeniable. She wasn't just on the edge anymore. She had crossed into dangerous territory. Ethan was pacing now, muttering under his breath. He caught her eyes when she entered and immediately froze. "What is it? What happened?" he asked, his voice a little too tense. The question felt rehearsed, like he already knew what she was going to say. But the moment had passed too quickly for her to second-guess herself, and she blurted out the first thing that came to her mind. "Someone's watching us, Ethan. I saw the car. They're following me. They know everything." Ethan's expression darkened. He didn't even blink. Instead, he grabbed her arm, his grip tightening in a way that made her heart race. "Listen to me, Sarah. I told you to stop. This isn't a game. They won't stop until you back off." His words hung in the air, heavy with the threat they implied. It was then that Sarah realized that Ethan wasn't just worried, he was afraid. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe he was afraid of her, of what she was digging into, rather than afraid for her safety. Before she could ask him what he meant, the silence was shattered by a loud bang on the front door. Sarah's pulse shot through the roof, and her body froze. She rushed to the window, her mind racing with the thought that maybe the worst had come. Who was at the door? And why hadn't she heard the car approaching? The doorbell rang again, insistent, followed by another loud knock. Then silence. She felt her breath catch in her throat. Ethan moved quickly, pushing her away from the window. "Don't open it," he hissed, his eyes darting around the room, as if looking for an escape route. "They're here. They've found us." Max appeared in the hallway, his face pale and filled with fear. "What's going on? Who's at the door?" His voice trembled, but Sarah didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure who or what was on the other side, but the fear in Ethan's eyes was enough to tell her that it was not a friendly visit. With her heart pounding, Sarah stepped away from the door, instinctively reaching for her phone. She needed to call the police, but as her fingers hovered over the screen, her phone buzzed again. A new message. "Stop now, or we'll make sure they never see the light of day." Her throat constricted, and her hands shook as she read the words again. This wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. A very real, very dangerous one. She felt a cold chill run down her spine, and the walls of her home suddenly felt smaller, as if the very air was closing in on her. They knew about her kids. They knew everything. And if she didn't listen, they wouldn't hesitate to make good on their threat. Max looked over her shoulder, seeing the message. "Mom, what does that mean?" His voice cracked, and Sarah could see the fear in his eyes, a fear that mirrored her own. She didn't know how to answer him. How could she explain this to a 12-year-old? How could she explain that their lives had been upended by a force they couldn't see, couldn't even begin to understand? The man in the doorway didn't move, and the air in the room seemed to grow thicker with each passing second. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, and she could feel the panic rising. She couldn't move, couldn't think. All she knew was that she had to protect her children at any cost. Ethan had backed away into the shadows, his face pale, as if seeing this man was something he had feared for a long time. But just as Sarah opened her mouth to shout, to demand answers, Ethan stepped forward, his hand raised, silencing her with a single look. The man in the doorway didn't flinch. He just stood there, a silent sentinel, his eyes scanning the room, as if waiting for something to happen. Then, unexpectedly, the man spoke again. But his words weren't directed at Sarah. They were for Ethan. "You knew this day would come. I warned you to stay out of it. But here we are. Your sister's too deep in, and now there's no going back." Sarah's pulse spiked. What was he talking about? Her thoughts whirled in 100 different directions, and she turned to Ethan, the betrayal seeping into her mind. Why hadn't he told her any of this? Was this why he had been so desperate for her to stop digging? The weight of the situation crashed down on her, and the pieces that had never quite fit before began to make sense in a horrifying way. "I didn't want her involved," Ethan muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could protect her, but it's too late now." He looked back at Sarah, his eyes full of regret, and something darker, something she couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but the truth is, I'm the one they've been after all along." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Sarah's throat went dry as she tried to make sense of what he was saying. What truth? And how could Ethan, the person she had trusted most in this world, be at the center of all this? The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Everything, every cryptic message, every threat, every terrifying encounter had been linked to Ethan, and she had never seen it coming. The man in the doorway gave a cold, humorless chuckle. "You should have known, Ethan. You always were too stubborn for your own good." He turned his gaze back to Sarah, his expression unreadable. "She has no idea, does she?" he said, his voice almost pitying. "You've been too busy protecting your sister to let her in on the secret. But it's not just about her anymore." Sarah stood motionless, her mind struggling to process the sudden shift in everything she thought she knew. Ethan had been hiding something deep and dangerous. But what was it? And why had he kept it from her all this time? "Stop lying to her," Ethan snapped, his voice suddenly fierce. "This isn't about me. You don't understand what's at stake." He turned toward the man in the doorway, his voice dropping. "You should have left her out of this. She never needed to know. This was never supposed to touch her." The stranger smirked, clearly enjoying the moment of tension. "You were always going to drag her into it, whether you wanted to or not. She's already involved, whether you like it or not." He turned back to Sarah, his eyes cold, calculating. "It's not just Ethan they've been after, Sarah. It's you too. You've been in danger from the moment you started asking questions." Sarah's world felt like it was crumbling around her, and she had no idea which way to turn. The man in the doorway, his words had shattered everything she thought she knew about her family, about Ethan, about her life. She stood there in the eerie silence, the weight of the revelation crushing her chest as she stared at her brother, who was now hunched over in the chair, his hands shaking. Her mind raced, each thought colliding with the next, and her heart pounded so loudly in her ears she could barely hear her own voice when she finally spoke. "You knew, didn't you?" The words escaped her, sharp and full of pain. She didn't need to ask. She didn't need him to confirm it. But she needed to hear it, because if he said the words out loud, if he admitted it, then maybe she would understand the truth. Maybe it would all make sense. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard and drawn with regret, but he didn't answer right away. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, and Sarah's hands balled into fists as she fought to keep her composure. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but the weight of what he had said, what he had hidden from her, stole the breath from her lungs. "I never wanted this for you," Ethan said finally, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I thought I could protect you. I tried to protect you from the truth. But you wouldn't listen. You had to dig deeper. You had to ask questions." He looked up at her then, his gaze desperate. "This isn't just about us, Sarah. This is about everything. And the people who are coming for us? They're not playing games." Sarah's head spun as she tried to process his words, to make sense of it all. She could feel the panic rising in her throat, the dread settling deep in her gut. She had trusted Ethan. She had relied on him. And now she was faced with the truth that he had been lying to her the entire time. All the signs had been there, the warnings she had ignored, the way he had pushed her away whenever she got too close. But the stakes were so much higher now. Ethan had dragged her into this, whether he meant to or not. And now she had no choice but to find a way out. But there was no way out, was there? There was only the cold, relentless pull of a truth she wasn't ready for. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Sarah froze, her blood running cold. The fear in her chest gripped her like a vice. Who could that be? Who else knew she was here? The man he had left, but the threat still hung in the air. Had they come for her? Had they come for Ethan? Or worse, had they come for Max and Lily? "Don't answer it," Ethan said quickly, his voice low, almost pleading. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "I'm telling you, Sarah, this is bigger than you realize. You don't know who you're dealing with. If you open that door, if you let anyone else in, it could be the end." The knock came again, louder now, more insistent. Her pulse pounded in her ears as her mind raced. She couldn't just ignore it. Whatever was on the other side of that door, it had been coming for them for far too long. But she also knew deep down, a chilling gut instinct, that if she opened it, there was no turning back. No more safety, no more lies, no more protection. There would be only the brutal, raw truth, and with it, whatever horrors had been waiting in the shadows. She glanced at Ethan, the brother she had trusted, and saw the fear etched across his face, a fear she hadn't seen before. It was a different kind of fear, guilt, shame, and a desperation that ran deeper than anything she had ever imagined. He wasn't just afraid for himself. He was terrified for her, for their family, because what he had been protecting them from wasn't just some random criminal organization or a few rogue individuals. No, this went deeper, far deeper than anything they could have anticipated. "I didn't want you to know this, but it's the only way you'll understand. This is bigger than anything I've told you. The people behind all of this, they don't just want us, Sarah. They've been watching you for years. They've been planning this for longer than you can imagine." Ethan's voice cracked as he spoke, the weight of his confession crushing him. He looked at her with an intensity that was almost too much to bear. "You're not just a target, Sarah. You're the key." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. The key? What the hell did that mean? And how had she never seen it before? All the signs had been there, the cryptic warnings, the photos, the whispered conversations she'd overheard but hadn't understood. But now, with every second that ticked by, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to click together in a horrifying way. Suddenly, the door creaked open just a crack, and Sarah froze. The figure standing there wasn't what she expected. Sarah's world felt like it was crumbling around her, and she had no idea which way to turn. The man in the doorway, his words had shattered everything she thought she knew about her family, about Ethan, about her life. She stood there in the eerie silence, the weight of the revelation crushing her chest as she stared at her brother, who was now hunched over in the chair, his hands shaking. Her mind raced, each thought colliding with the next, and her heart pounded so loudly in her ears, she could barely hear her own voice when she finally spoke. "You knew, didn't you?" The words escaped her, sharp and full of pain. She didn't need to ask. She didn't need him to confirm it. But she needed to hear it, because if he said the words out loud, if he admitted it, then maybe she would understand the truth. Maybe it would all make sense. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard and drawn with regret, but he didn't answer right away. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, and Sarah's hands balled into fists as she fought to keep her composure. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but the weight of what he had said, what he had hidden from her, stole the breath from her lungs. "I never wanted this for you," Ethan said finally, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I thought I could protect you. I tried to protect you from the truth, but you wouldn't listen. You had to dig deeper. You had to ask questions." He looked up at her then, his gaze desperate. "This isn't just about us, Sarah. This is about everything. And the people who are coming for us, they're not playing games." Sarah's head spun as she tried to process his words, to make sense of it all. She could feel the panic rising in her throat, the dread settling deep in her gut. She had trusted Ethan. She had relied on him, and now she was faced with the truth that he had been lying to her the entire time. All the signs had been there, the warnings she had ignored, the way he had pushed her away whenever she got too close. But the stakes were so much higher now. Ethan had dragged her into this, whether he meant to or not, and now she had no choice but to find a way out. But there was no way out, was there? There was only the cold, relentless pull of a truth she wasn't ready for. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Sarah froze, her blood running cold. The fear in her chest gripped her like a vice. Who could that be? Who else knew she was here? The man he had left, but the threat still hung in the air. Had they come for her? Had they come for Ethan? Or worse, had they come for Max and Lily? "Don't answer it," Ethan said quickly, his voice low, almost pleading. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "I'm telling you, Sarah, this is bigger than you realize. You don't know who you're dealing with. If you open that door, if you let anyone else in, it could be the end." The knock came again, louder now, more insistent. Her pulse pounded in her ears as her mind raced. She couldn't just ignore it. Whatever was on the other side of that door, it had been coming for them for far too long. But she also knew deep down, a chilling gut instinct, that if she opened it, there was no turning back. No more safety, no more lies, no more protection. There would be only the brutal, raw truth, and with it, whatever horrors had been waiting in the shadows. She glanced at Ethan, the brother she had trusted, and saw the fear etched across his face, a fear she hadn't seen before. It was a different kind of fear, guilt, shame, and a desperation that ran deeper than anything she had ever imagined. He wasn't just afraid for himself. He was terrified for her, for their family, because what he had been protecting them from wasn't just some random criminal organization or a few rogue individuals. No, this went deeper, far deeper than anything they could have anticipated. "I didn't want you to know this, but it's the only way you'll understand. This is bigger than anything I've told you. The people behind all of this, they don't just want us, Sarah. They've been watching you for years. They've been planning this for longer than you can imagine." Ethan's voice cracked as he spoke, the weight of his confession crushing him. He looked at her with an intensity that was almost too much to bear. "You're not just a target, Sarah. You're the key." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. The key? What the hell did that mean? And how had she never seen it before? All the signs had been there, the cryptic warnings, the photos, the whispered conversations she'd overheard, but hadn't understood. But now, with every second that ticked by, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to click together in a horrifying way. Suddenly, the door creaked open just a crack, and Sarah froze. The figure standing there wasn't what she expected. 2. The answer was already clear. The way Sarah had been manipulated, the way her life had been upended, it all pointed to one thing. One name. But it was a name Sarah never wanted to say aloud. Because saying it would make it real. It would make it undeniable. "The foundation," Rachel said quietly, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "They've been controlling everything for years. You've been their target all along. And now it's time." The storm had passed. It was over, or so it seemed. Sarah sat in the dim light of her living room, the silence pressing in on her like a weight she could barely carry. Her children were safe. They were home, their faces still pale, but no longer marked by fear. They had gotten away, just barely. And Rachel. Rachel had vanished. There was no trace of her, no sign of where she had gone, or who might have helped her disappear. The police had searched, questioned, but they didn't understand the whole picture. How could they? The pieces of this puzzle didn't fit into the world they knew. Everything they'd uncovered had only scratched the surface of something far darker, far more dangerous. And as Sarah looked around her home, the familiar comfort of it all felt distant somehow. Max and Lily had tried to act normal, to reassure her that everything would be okay. But Sarah knew better than anyone that nothing would ever be the same again. She'd spent so long trying to protect them, trying to keep them from the truth, from the danger that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But now that it was all out in the open, she couldn't escape the truth that lingered in the corners of her mind, like a dark cloud she couldn't outrun. The foundation. Rachel's betrayal. The strangers who had invaded her home, her life, who had been watching her every move for years. She had learned so much, maybe too much. And yet, even with all the pieces in place, something still gnawed at her, something she couldn't shake. The file that Rachel had left behind was sitting on the kitchen counter, untouched. Every time Sarah looked at it, she felt a coldness creeping up her spine, a sense that opening it was opening a door she might never be able to close. She had already seen enough. She had seen what they were capable of, what they were planning. But now, with everything that had happened, with Rachel's disappearance, and with the faint but growing sense of unease that something was still out there, Sarah couldn't bring herself to open it, to read what it contained. It was as if doing so would pull her back into that darkness she had fought so hard to escape. She thought about the phone call she had received that morning, the one that had thrown everything into chaos. The voice on the other end had been distorted, but the message was clear. You think you've won, but you're still in the game. You'll never escape. You'll never be free. The voice had hung up before she could respond, leaving her with more questions than answers. She had tried to trace the number, but it was untraceable. It didn't belong to anyone. It was a shadow, just like the people who had been hunting her. Sarah had hoped, foolishly, that the nightmare was over. But the truth was, it wasn't. Not really. Not as long as the foundation was out there, not as long as she was connected to it. Max and Lily had already started school again, settling into a routine that Sarah desperately hoped would bring them back to normal. But it wasn't the same. Nothing felt the same. There were still moments, fleeting but sharp, when Sarah could feel eyes on her, when she would glance over her shoulder in the street, sure that someone was watching, waiting. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, that they hadn't given up on her, that Rachel hadn't just betrayed her, but had disappeared for a reason, because the foundation wasn't done with them yet. Sarah's mind wandered back to the moment when she had last seen Rachel, when everything had started to fall apart. There was something in Rachel's eyes that she hadn't fully understood at the time, a look of regret, but also of desperation. Rachel hadn't been fully in control of her actions. She had been pushed, manipulated, just like Sarah had been. But Sarah couldn't deny the truth anymore. She couldn't let herself fall into the same trap of believing that everyone around her had good intentions. She had trusted Rachel. She had trusted so many people along the way. And look where it had gotten her. No, Sarah had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not anymore. As the days passed, Sarah's thoughts became consumed with the same question. Who was really behind all of this? The foundation, they had called it. But who were they? How far did their reach go? And what had they wanted from her in the first place? Was it just a matter of power, control,